Okay, Robert. So, for starters, could you please tell us the thesis of your book, Midnight in the American Empire?
Because it's been a few years since I've written this book. Here it is right here, my Midnight in the American Empire. I should just give a little bit of background, I guess, first, in that I worked for almost a decade for a large corporation in the United States, AT&T actually. I guess I can tell that. Although we signed a non-disclosure agreement, so there are some details I guess I shouldn't talk about. I don't think AT&T will drag me into court though anytime soon. But um, so, anyways, I worked for AT&T for, like I said, 10 years, and through that experience, which I can't say was a very pleasant one, I I began thinking about corporations and how they operate, and the fact that I was in a union while I worked there, and I got to see firsthand how this all works and how it doesn't work. This kind of gave me the impetus, the inspiration to write this book. So it was a long project that is something I thought about and for years, and then finally trying to put all those thoughts onto paper. It took a very long time, and so long actually that the publisher actually told me that I had to go back and change a lot of the data because it had become dated. So that also took some time. But I guess the thesis of it just boiled down to a nugget is that it's just talking about democracy and in the corporations, how there is a lack of democracy in the corporations, I believe, and that how corporations have come to really transform the communities in the United States, not necessarily in a good way. You have the Walmartification now of communities and um, things like that, and how it's in my opinion and the opinion of many other people, much more intelligent than myself, say that it's to basically destroyed the feeling of community in communities. And so I guess that's basically the gist of it, something like that. And I also talk about some court cases that have helped to empower these corporations through the years, and to great negative effect to the American people, I believe.
Wait. What you said was kind of interesting. They always tell us that democracy is supposed to be the realm of the relationship between citizens and government. You kind of have a different take.
Well, it just to me, it just seems like if we're living in a democracy and we spend the majority of our times at our jobs, you would think that that democracy would also apply to our workplaces. And in a way that it kind of did when we had the notion of labor unions who would represent us. So this whole notion isn't necessarily uh, unheard of. That's how labor unions came into force, was because people wanted to have representatives, just like in the political realm, speaking for them, because they can't do this all the time. They can't think about all the different issues. If a comes against a worker, they want to have somebody who's there to help them and speak up for them. And I saw that in action quite a lot. Although, of course, there could be abuses of union power. I saw many people at my workplace, for example, they just they didn't care about their jobs. They knew that they were protected by their union bosses, and they didn't, so they slagged off. Not everybody was like that, and you can make lots of cases against unions, but I think in general, what we've seen through the years since like the 1970s, when union representation within workplaces was about, I don't know, 35%, it's down to like 6% now in the private sector. You've seen just gross violations of worker protection laws, and people just don't have that protection anymore. You can fire workers, you can make them work like a dog, make them force them to work overtime, for example. Like when I was there, you couldn't make a person work overtime without having to compensate them. Now they could make you do overtime without caring about it. And another important thing, and just while it's on my mind, is vacation time. The United States happens to be the only country in the free world, maybe even in the unfree world, that has no vacation laws on the books. So these corporations can basically just say, hey, we're not going to give you a vacation. I mean, of course they do, but they give the bare minimum amount to the employees, and American workers now enjoy the least amount of vacation of anybody else in the world. So, you could just look at those facts there as reasons why we need democracy in the workplace.
It always does bug me how certain groups stand up for the sanctity and the inalienable rights of the individual and how amazing he is until he punches it at work. Then he's just a piece of garbage that can be treated however the employer wants. But, anyways, Robert, you've had a few years to observe events after the release of your book. So, do you feel that your thesis has been confirmed, or has America started to maybe change in a different direction?
Well, when I wrote this, Tim, it was mostly about a lot of it was about the economic injustices. There's a whole chapter on that. Um, so that the economic part of it was a big part of it. But looking back, I'd probably call the book maybe Morning in the American Empire. The way things are going now, the things that corporations are able to get away with. It's not only corporations, but I mean, sticking to that subject, you see what they're doing now. They're promoting things that I could never have imagined. Gillette, for example, promoting their toxic masculinity commercials. Sprite promoting their transgender commercials. Things like this. They've become more like social activists in the political realm as opposed to simply being limited in the economic realm and just selling us products. Now they're trying to get people to change their opinions. They're becoming very powerful political players. There was a court case, Citizens United, back in 2000 something. I can't remember the exact date, but that just opened up the floodgates for corporations to dump money into the political election system, and they could really influence things that way, to the point when you have a case now where politicians, they're no longer really representing the people. If it was ever the case before, they're representing the corporations. Before it was probably they're representing the railroads. Now they're representing top 10, top 20 companies that provide 95% of our goods and services. So the whole notion of democracy now, it's just a complete sham. And corporations have. I remember, I think it was Jesse Ventura. He made a great statement one time. He said that politicians, when they enter into Congress, they should wear, like, you see the NASCAR drivers, they all have their patches on them from different companies that sponsor them. He said that politicians should walk into Congress wearing those patches on them, and I totally agree. These guys are just completely bought out, and there's no representation left for the people.
Not only are they bought out, but the level of intellect of congressmen seems to be shocking. It is amazing just how little those trust fund kids got from their Ivy League educations. But anyway, speaking of politicians that have failed their nations, let's take a look at some of the other big collapses of history. The Roman Empire, the British Empire, the Soviet Empire. So, would the potential collapse of America be something similar to these other historic collapses, or is America truly exceptional in this regard?
Well, we like to believe that we're exceptional, and in some ways, I suppose we are, but not probably for the moral reasons that we like to believe. Exceptional in the case that we've really, truly gone global. The Roman Empire in their day, they were global, but the world was a much smaller place then, and they were defeated by barbarians at the gates. We're in the United States today. We're letting so-called, I hate to use the word barbarians, but we're letting illegals into our country, and we seem to think that that's a great thing. That's gonna, it's gonna increase our diversity and make us more powerful. You had the Soviet Empire. Uh, the Soviets, and I have to really give them a lot of credit. We call them the evil empire, but when the Russians and the rest of the countries understood that the game was up, they didn't want to drag the whole world down with them. They understood that, okay, it's not working anymore. We got to give this up and try something different, and they did, and they made the transition. Although, albeit it was a terribly difficult one, millions of people died in that transition. Probably still suffering today, trying to make the transition from communism to capitalism. But they did make the transition. But the United States and the American empire, I don't see us ever giving up the empire without bringing down the entire world with it. And I have lots of personal, well, I don't know if I can call them personal, but I have reasons why that's the case. It's just so much, it's almost become like a religious cult, this whole American empire. And we believe that we have to spread our message across the world and that only we can save the planet. And you got a lot of powerful forces behind the scenes, even up to and including secret societies. It's just unbelievable. You know, you've got all these groups that it's a so-called democracy, but yet if you look at all the hands behind the scenes, um, you could start naming some. Bilderberg Group, for example, Bohemian Grove, Skull and Bones. You look at these groups, and these people they're very much dedicated and to promoting this new world order agenda. And it's been talked about quite a lot. It's getting a lot more press again, and I think that this idea it's flourishing not only in the United States but in groups around the world and governments around the world, and I think that's a real danger. And so it's not just like, for example, the Soviet Union that was kind of limited in its scope, although very huge, of course. You had two sides opposing each other, but yeah, with the American empire, it's a whole different story.
Now, there have been a lot of doom and gloom books written about America over the decades, most of which have been proven to be bad predictions. Now, your book was very different from those in that you relate the ills of American society to just a handful of Supreme Court rulings. That's interesting. And most importantly, that's a problem that's very, very fixable. So, could you please tell us about some of these Supreme Court cases and how they hurt America so deeply?
I can't say that I'm a legal scholar, but doing my own personal research and following up on the research of other people, yeah, I did come to the conclusion that corporate America they have a lot of court cases that back them. And for example, the main one, well, not the main one, but one of the first ones was the Dartmouth College case. Okay, I won't get into all the details because I know this legal stuff is boring as heck. But basically, it was, and I'm reading from my book here because I don't recall all this stuff offhand, like a typical lawyer would. So forgive me. But this was basically the state of New Hampshire. They sought to revoke a charter that had been issued to Dartmouth College, okay, in the days before the United States had won its independence from the British Crown, okay. And in the court case, in the court ruling, the Chief Justice, whose name was John Marshall, he included this very encompassing definition of what he believed a corporation was, and this set a precedent. That's what it's considered to be today, which is, and if I could read the part of this to you, it's kind of astonishing. It says that a corporation is an artificial being. It's invisible, intangible, and existing only in the contemplation of the law. Being a mere creature of law, it possesses only those properties which the charter of its creation confers upon it, either expressly or as incidental to its very existence, blah, 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 blah. They enable a corporation to manage its own affairs and to hold property without the perplexing intricacies, the hazardous and endless necessity of perpetual conveyances, and it goes on and on. So it just, it's kind of astounding that they could call something like a corporation, which is a very physical thing, of course. I mean, it's concrete. We can look at it. We can see the brand. We can see the logo. We see the employees going in, but yet it's considered to be invisible and artificial. So that just set the tone for other court cases down the road. Next one being, I'm not going to go too in depth. Like I said, I don't want to bore your listeners here. But in 1886, the Supreme Court went one step further in empowering the corporations in the Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Railroad case. Okay, this is really an unbelievable one, where it was decided that private corporations are entitled to the rights found in the 14th Amendment. And the 14th Amendment is basically personhood. This grants, so basically what this did was, and it's really sneaky how they got this to pass through. It's unbelievable, and it probably would be grounds you talked about a way that maybe there's a way to go back and redo these court cases or rescind them. This might be one way because the court reporter in the case, his name was Bancroft Davis. This is unbelievable. He attached a comment after the case had been recorded and everything was finished and they had the documents all drafted. He attached a comment into the head note of the case, and where he said the defendant corporations are persons within the intent of the clause of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, which forbids a state to deny any person, that is a corporation, within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Okay, then he goes on to write, the court does not wish to hear argument on the question whether the provision in the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, which forbids a state to deny to any person within its jurisdiction all the equal protections of the law. We are of the opinion that it does. Okay, so in just that one paragraph, this one individual, and Bancroft, this is another interesting thing. Bancroft Davis was just no ordinary person. He had been the president of the Newburgh and New York Railway Company. So somehow he got to be the court reporter there to attach that addendum to this court ruling, which has had serious implications on corporate power and something that's not talked about. I would imagine most people don't. I didn't know about that until I started researching it. Media certainly doesn't talk about it, and the implications are just massive when you bless the corporation not only with invisibility and artificiality, but with personhood. So this is just unbelievable. The powers that they possess.
Yeah, it's kind of funny how in our system you can't have rights for any sort of group, but you can have them for an invisible, made up entity. So we have the rugged individual against these giant entities. And when you're General Electric or Lockheed Martin or Microsoft, guess who wins in that battle of rights? Not me, that's for sure. So the question is, if the Supreme Court caused all this insanity, are they really the battleground for making change? Is the future of America in the hands of 9 people in weird black robes?
Uh, yeah, that's a big question right now, and the Democrats, of course, they see it as a big problem with Amy Barrett just being sworn in. Well, not just, but last year under Donald Trump. Yeah, the Kavanaugh case, which was just a fiasco. So it would be nice to know that the Supreme Court was completely neutral, but of course that's not the case. These are individuals with their own opinions, their own views, whether they be liberal or conservative. So the Democrats now, they're talking about loading up the Supreme Court in order to, because right now they're in the minority, so to speak. And actually, that's how George W. Bush became president, was through the Supreme Court. He back in 2000, they violated. I guess you could say they violated the well, they followed the Constitution, but it's just ridiculous how it happened. Did a whole recount, and it ended up being that the Supreme Court are the ones who Supreme Court justices are the ones who actually voted him into office, selected him into office by a 5-4 margin, I believe. So it's a huge question. Should the Supreme Court justices be able to rule like Ruth Ginsburg until in her late 80s, 90, whatever, or wait just until they die under strange circumstances, as was the case with Antonio Scalia, who died with a pillow over his face at night in a hunting lodge somewhere. If you remember that story. So it's a really good question. Should they serve life terms or not? Should they be just, you're talking about law of the land, so I can kind of understand how they don't want this to be just a 4-year term or an 8-year term. You want people in there who are going to make long-term decisions, hopefully not based just upon their political beliefs, but unfortunately that's what it's coming down to. The Democrats right now are furious about that. They're going to try to do something, load the bench, I suppose. So it's going back and forth. Of course, like everything in American politics, nothing is straightforward. You're always going to have this tension, and kind of drifting off into the subject of Russia. That's what I really like about Russia. is that you don't have this back and forth. Things are much more straightforward. You want to. Seems like the people have much more say. They the opinions of the people seem to really matter, and which I know might sound, I don't know, ironic to some listeners.
Robert also lives out here with me in Russia, so I'm kind of curious to hear his opinion about how American and Russian democracy differ from each other.
Well, one thing that strikes me about being here in Russia is how fast legislation can get through. Okay, and I'll give you one example. Maybe the most famous example is Vladimir Putin's so-called anti. They called it in the West the anti-gay law. Okay, but it was anything but that. It was a law passed several years ago with enlightening speed, where they basically just said that they want to prevent children from being exposed to any sort of sexual messages, children under the age of 18. All right, that includes in the classroom, through commercials, through TV shows. Okay, no discussions about alternative lifestyles, no promoting, not even just promoting regular, I guess heterosexual relationships. There's a place for that. And now I thought to myself, after seeing this pass through the Duma, like I said, in lightning speed, a few days, and by a huge majority of the legislators, not in the Russian population, 90 some% of the people supported it. Now, can you imagine that type of legislation trying to get through Congress? What that would require to do something like that? And to me, it's such a common sense thing. It's just based purely on common sense. You don't need children thinking about these types of things at a young age. When they become 18, okay, fine, they can think about it all they want, or maybe even 16, they can start having these types of educational classes, talking about it a little bit. But to throw these types of topics at children about transgender, this is just completely confusing children. They're not mature enough to handle these types of subjects at these ages. Nor is the school the place to be handling these types of things, nor are commercials, for example, like Sprite came out with their transgender commercial. I mean, come on, this is ridiculous. Let children be children. Let them come to their own conclusions through their own ways. If they have any questions, let them talk to their parents. There's no need for the school system to be promoting these things, which is what's happening in the United States right now, which is to me extremely disturbing that they're promoting and talking about these things. The school books, the textbooks, what I'm seeing and hearing, it's just incredible. I mean, the most degraded things that you can imagine. And that would never fly in Russia and many other countries, Hungary, and many other places. In Europe, many countries there, I'm seeing that it would, and that's disturbing. And that's why I look at Russia as this bastion of sanity, if you will, against this tide of Western liberalism that is just, in many ways, honestly insane. You see the things that they're promoting, the types of teachers that are promoting this stuff, the things that are important to these teachers. It's literally insanity, and I don't see how it's going to promote the good of the nation, the country. The main purpose of education is of course, it's just to receive an education, get your kids prepared for the world. I'm not talking about what pronoun they are or things like that. It's absurd, and you don't have that in Russia. And I hope to God that it stays that way.
Now, there was this man, a strange man, a rich man with terrible hair named Donald Trump. And he came in and he promised big changes and to save America. But the question is, do you think that Trump was actually a potential part of the solution? Or was he just blowing hot wind to feed his ego and get elected? And since he still seems to refer to himself as president, do you think he's going to be back in 2024?
Yeah, theoretically, he was like the lightning rod that he was the leader at the right time, and of course not the best leader perhaps, but he through his personality, his persuasiveness. And you have to remember that this isn't just a guy. He gets a lot of slack, and I can understand it. The guy, his personality, of course, doesn't always isn't always the best, and he can rub people the wrong way. Put it that way. But they've been talking about this guy being in politics now for many decades, for 30 years probably. I remember him in an interview on Oprah Winfrey. They were asking, well, why don't you get into politics? And he always was kind of cold about it. And no, 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 it's not something I want. I don't need it. Uh, so it's something that's always really been in the air with Donald Trump. It's not like he just was pulled out of his TV show and thrown into the political circus. He's been a name floating around for a while. And when I read, when you see what he's for, what he stands for, America first, stopping these exports from China into the United States, get American industry back on its feet again, closing the border. I mean, how can these things not what's the word? Of course, conservatives are going to love this message. This is everything that the Republican Party is all about: God, country, jobs, and he provided all of that, and he promoted, and then you had on top of that, he completely slacked off the media, which everybody just loved, and to this day, because of Donald Trump, nobody trusts the American media, and that's really because of him. He just really uh, dragged them over the coals and made them look utterly ridiculous. And before Trump, there was a lot of respect. I don't know if respect is the right word, but a lot of trust for the media. But he was able to show that that was a complete lie, and so he tapped into a lot of these feelings that a lot of Americans had. And I genuinely believe that he genuinely believed in them as well. He really loves America. He wants the best for his country. Uh, Whether or not, sometimes I have my doubts about him, though. You've got this paradigm between the Democrats and Republicans. They're always playing this game back and forth. He had been predicted to be president on the Simpsons, of course, which should also be signal some alarms there. So and then he also, what did he do at the end there? He promoted the vaccine, which actually turned off a lot of conservatives, because a lot of them don't want to be told to take a vaccine. They don't want to be told what to do by the government. They have this libertarian streak in them, of course, independent streak in them, and they're very they don't want government telling them what to do. So he came out in a speech, and it was the one time I heard Trump booed in my life, was when he said everybody should go out and get their vaccine, and there was just this silence in the stadium, and then you heard the booing, and he was stunned. It was like somebody punched him. He never had that feeling before. So it's just, to me, it's a bit strange how he did come out with that, and he was promoting the vaccine. This what did he call it? The warp speed vaccine. Who wants a warp speed vaccine injected into them? I don't. Uh, Many conservatives don't. If I'm going to have an injection or a vaccine, I'm going to want to make sure that it's been put on experiment. It's been experimented on for a long time. I don't want to be the experiment itself. Uh, I don't know. Maybe some people disagree with that, but that's the view of many conservatives. And so he's is he going to make it in 2024? He's going to be, pushing 80. Joe Biden, if he's still around, I don't think he's going to last another year. He's going to be 83, I suppose, by the time the next elections roll around. So we might see completely different players in there. Uh, DeSantis, for example, from Florida, he seems to be decent. Although, who knows? Maybe he's pro-war, like a lot of Republicans are. That's the one thing I could say. Another good thing that I could say about Donald Trump: he was in power for 4 years, and we didn't have any major hostilities, no major conflicts, no wars. He did his smart bombing of places like Barack Obama did. He couldn't resist that, but we kept out of foreign entanglements for the most part, which was pretty incredible. And I think that's why one of the reasons why they despised the guy is because he was anti-war. And the one time when he did launch those rockets into Syria, the media suddenly loved him. He could do no wrong. That's probably why he even did it. He loved to play games like that with the media and just show them what kind of warmongering hypocrites they were and are. So yeah, there was definitely a place for Donald Trump. He probably has another shot at 2020, the presidency in 2024. We'll have to see though how that goes.
Going back to our theme of midnight in the American Empire, do you think the storming of Capitol Hill on January 6th was a symbol of the beginning of some sort of dark strife in the end of America, or a moment of patriotic hope when the masses rose up to correct all the problems in society?
I think the greater meaning of it is just how divided the country really is. It's totally divided down the middle, and it's really hard to imagine. There's always been this divide between the liberals, as you know, growing up. You know, you heard about the Republicans, Democrats, Ronald Reagan versus Jimmy Carter, all that. But the divide now, it's become so ferocious, and uh, and with Donald Trump, the nation just really lost its mind. The left really lost its mind, I should say, and they took things. I don't know. I think they. I don't have much faith in American democracy, and in terms of the way the elections are run, especially after what happened after Biden getting in there. I really question that. I'm not going to say that it was an outright fraud, but it looked very suspicious to me. The fact that they don't want to investigate, or that when they do, anyway. So a lot of people feel that way, and the January 6th so-called insurrection, I think, was a complete joke. It wasn't anything like that. You had, and it just shows how the media can play on people's feelings. You had for that entire summer before that so-called insurrection, where you just had a bunch of middle-aged fat guys crowding into the Congress, taking selfies of themselves. Nothing close to an insurrection. Had Nancy Pelosi showed up, they wouldn't have known what to do. They would have just screamed at her, and that would have been it. But for the summer before the insurrection and so-called insurrection, you had Black Lives Matter activists running rampant across the country. Law enforcement doing absolutely nothing. Democratic governors and mayors turning their eyes to this, what was happening. I mean, literally billions of dollars worth of destruction from sea to shining sea, and nothing being done. And why, I don't understand why Donald Trump. I guess he had his reasons, but at the time, I just couldn't understand why he didn't really crack down. And that's a different story as well. The fact is that the Democrats they really like encouraged these riots. They worked to keep the people who were prosecuted for crimes, for vandalism and everything. They got them out of jail early. You had that couple, the lawyers from, I believe from, if I'm not mistaken, from Minneapolis. I can't think of his name right now. It was a married couple. They came out on their front porch of a very wealthy neighborhood. The crowds had broken into their suburban neighborhood, and they came out brandishing their weapons, protecting their property. And instead of the people who broke into their territory being prosecuted, they prosecuted the people who came. Oh, the McCloskeys, I believe, were their last names, lawyers. They came out on their front porch brandishing weapons. They're the ones that actually almost went to jail. And when you look at the district attorney of that, like I said, I think it was Minneapolis, of that area, this woman had been put in there by basically George Soros and all of his money. Not put in there, but she got a lot of her money through his wallet. And that's the type of trend you see in the United States right now. This aggressive left wing ideology that has just gone completely overboard, to the point where they're willing to defend criminals against law. I mean, really law-abiding Americans. And this is just, we've gone into territory that I'm sure that you've never seen. I've never seen before in my lifetime, where it's become this way. And now we're letting illegal migrants into our country from the southern border. This is also another thing that many conservatives, myself, I just cannot grasp it, cannot understand it. Protecting your border, it's just one of the most fundamental things of nationhood. And this just goes back to the fact that these people, these globalists, they don't want nation. They have no care for nation at all. They're undermining family units. They're undermining individual working abilities of people, the Protestant ethic. They don't care about any of that. It's all about being a global unit now. And that's what I really believe this is where it's heading. They're trying to break this all down. That's why Hungary, for example, this Eastern European country, they're facing the wrath of Brussels because they did the simple thing of building a fence on their border with Serbia in Croatia. And this is considered to be this is like a racist gesture. This is what they consider to be a racist gesture now. Protecting your border has become equal to racism, which is the most absurd thing I've ever anybody could think of, any conservative. And they're able to promote this, and people are buying it, and the total hypocrites too, because these people they would never these people who are allowing this to happen, Alexandra Ocasio Cortez and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. Do you think that these people are going to have to put up with the consequences of having all these illegal Haitians coming in? You think they're going to be living and sleeping on their front lawn? No, it's going to be the people in in the heartland of America who are already struggling because of COVID, who are already struggling because many of them were forced out of business by the Walmarts and by the Amazons who they just got a windfall because all these other small businesses went out. So we have millions of Americans already struggling, trying to stay healthy, trying to keep their heads above the water economically, and now they're bringing in people who don't even have they don't even have to take a vaccine. They don't have to show a vaccine passport like foreign travelers coming from Europe have to do when they enter our country. They just let them in. I mean, this just goes to show the absolute hypocrisy, and it doesn't take a great brain to understand this. People see it down on the southern border. It's just incredible. So I don't know what the tipping point is. People are seeing, and you listen to one segment of Tucker Carlson, and you can see that okay, you know, it's it's game is almost over. You can only do this for so long before you've alienated enough people, and they just figure, okay, if we've got nothing to lose now, they've taken our jobs, they're taking our country, they don't care about our borders anymore. So what's it going to take to push it over? I don't know, but I think it's getting close to that point.
On a personal note, Robert, you're also outside of America now, too. So the question is, who do you see yourself as? Are you some sort of American dissident fighting from over here? Or have you just given up on the whole American dream entirely? And do you think that maybe there's some wisdom from Russia that would be very valuable to Americans?
To be honest, Tim, I just look at myself as a regular guy who, at the age of 30, I didn't have a passport. I had only flown one time on an airplane, and I just desperately wanted. I had worked for a corporation for 10 years, and I had just desperately wanted to see my country from a different perspective. I wanted to see the world, and I got the opportunity to come to Russia. It kind of on a fluke, and I hadn't anticipated being here for as long as I have been, which is a surprise quite to myself as well. Uh, but one thing led to another, and here I am. So I sometimes I would look back, like maybe 10 years ago, I'd look back and think, okay, maybe I spent too much time here. But right now, looking at the situation, and it's a situation that I don't think too many of us could have predicted. I mean, maybe some of the cultural Marxists among us could have predicted it. They were working towards it apparently since the 1940s. This type of situation that pits people against each other culturally instead of economically, and but took me by surprise. And I know that I don't want to be. Although I miss my country terribly, I I want the best for the United States. I spend a lot of my time writing about the United States from afar. I want to see it succeed, and I'm just doing my part as an American and somebody who wants the best for his homeland. Uh, and I don't know. I think I speak for a lot of Americans who just don't want to see these types of things. Don't want to see transgender taught in the classrooms. If you want to change your sex later on in life, okay, go ahead, go for it. Nobody's going to stop you. But why are they promoting these ideas to children when they're at their most fragile mentally and physically? They're not mature enough to hear these things, and so they're in many ways, because of social media, they're actually pushing children into these things to look cool, to be part of the gang, or whatever, for whatever reason. A lot of girls actually get caught up in that ideology. because it's just they're like I said, they're promoting this at that particular stage in their life when their confidence is low, they're not sure of themselves, they have low self-esteem, and then they hear this thing that okay, maybe you weren't born female after all, maybe you were really born a boy. Um, Everybody lied to you about it. So, and then they go ahead and I've written and I'm sorry for beating on about this transgender, but it's something that really bothers me. And a lot of times these children at a very young age, they go and have their operations, they in very severe operations that are irreversible. They get on hormone blockers, puberty blockers for the rest of their lives, which is another way that big pharma is being given a windfall. Uh, so you have that, and what else? Critical race theory. This whole idea that white people are to blame for all the woes of the world. And yes, as white people, we've committed our share of crimes, but and I think that white people have paid the price for what they've done. In many ways, the civil rights movement, which white people helped promote, uh, many ways, and I don't think you can just look at and that's basically what's happening now in the United States, which is another thing that's really worrying. And it's just another way of dividing people. Of course, there is no. I mean, I'm speaking as a white guy with all my privilege, of course, but I would say, and I would argue that when I worked at AT&T, for example, I worked alongside black people. We got along fine. I had black friends. You know, I just looked at them like ordinary, regular people. We hung out, and no problem with it. And I think this whole thing about racism, it's being really promoted in the media, and it's actually and not only media but academia. It's completely out of control, and so you look at academia pushing this critical race theory, and this just came out of nowhere. Really, I think it just took so many people by surprise. That it's the roots have been growing for a long time, and just finally, boom, the tree had it's in full bloom, and suddenly all whites are racist. Now with the death of that what was his name at the hands of the white police officer. Yeah, thank you, George Floyd. Suddenly because a black guy was killed at the hands of a white cop. And this happens a lot, but let's face it, there are lots and lots, even more whites, for example, who die at the hands of cops. Although there are more whites in America, whites are getting killed too by cops. And you could argue that, and this is what I've argued, is that we don't have a racist problem in the United States. Although, of course, we do have pockets of racism, we do have racists, but this out of control universal racism that they're trying to push and make people believe we have, I think it's the most dangerous thing, and they know that they're pushing a lie, and so they're trying to divide the country, and for whatever reason they're trying to promote this hatred between people, and so you got Black Lives Matter and all these movements going. You got the Proud Boys. So they've got their set pieces going for it's gonna take a very small thing now to set this off, and you'll be able to say, oh, see, look, it is a racist country after all. After they've been promoting this narrative nonstop for a long time now, and academics, like I said, this is just incredible what they're pushing. I would not want to be in academia these days. This whole thing with diversity, and I mean, I'm all for diversity, and of course, but this force type of thing that Jordan Peterson has talked about, where you're trying to push something, trying to get to, you don't care what the means are, you want to get to this end no matter what, and that's when it gets really dangerous and out of control. So I don't know where it's gonna end, Tim, but I don't think it looks very good in the American empire. So it's just a big question mark right now.